Your now syndicated columnist, Charles Krauthammer, also Fox News contributor. Charles, good evening to you. You've been listening to all of this and the Pat Robertson interview as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think what your interview with Browder illustrates is who the pawn was in this game. That lawyer was not, as some Trump apologists were trying to say earlier in the week, just some do-gooder human rights activist who was trying to help Russian orphans. She's an agent of the Russian government going after this act, which is about human rights, and the purpose is to punish the people in the Putin circle who tortured him and killed him. And I think it's one of the few acts of sanctions that works well because it doesn't hit the whole population. It hits the bad guys and their associates. And that's why Putin despises it. And she was used as a pawn in this episode. It doesn't change anything about what was in the chain of Donald Trump Jr. emails, which indicates that he was offered dirt from a foreign hostile power, and he went for it.
In terms of the actions of the Trump administration, because they have sought to lift some of these sanctions, and their members of Congress want to keep them, and clearly Bill Browder wants to make sure that these sanctions stay in place. You know, sort of serving that line does not help them in this whole story at all.
Well, the Trump administration actions on sanctions has been really zigzag and inconsistent. The Senate wants to slap on really hard sanctions, overwhelming vote to do it. The administration has resisted. The irony is that happened in the Obama administration, where they tried to slap on hard sanctions, and the administration resisted as well. So there's a pattern that continues here. I think there's no policy, really. Trump in that interview said, we try to get along. Fine, of course we try to get along. The ceasefire in Syria may be a good thing. We don't know how it'll work out. But that so far is the only fruit of his diplomacy.
Yeah. When you and I spoke yesterday, you talked about, you know, the naivete of Donald Trump Jr. being a lousy excuse. You know, 24 hours later, how does this story look to you? Is this something that the administration gets through, or is it just the beginning of more of these stories that could likely keep dropping and cause them a lot of trouble in getting anything done?
I think it's likely there are more stories, but even if there were none, the damage done by this story is enormous. And the reason is that for 6 months, the administration touted the line that there's no collusion, that's a Democratic exaggeration, it's a delusion on their part, it's a calumny on their part, there's nothing here. I supported that line because there was no evidence for it. But now you see the evidence loud and clear. An email that says the Russian government is supporting your father. As part of the effort, we got dirt. We're going to get the state prosecutor with documents to support that. We want you to take a meeting. And what does he say? I love it. I love it are deadly words. Even if it didn't pan out, that doesn't matter. Attempted collusion is still collusion. And that's why I think it undermined the entire story that collusion was a fiction. I always said, I don't see any collusion, but I'm open to empirical evidence. This is the first empirical evidence.
Charles Krauthammer, thank you very much, Charles. We'll see you next time.
My pleasure.